the simple man, or the virtue of cowardice. He didn't know where he was headed, how far his feet had brought him, or what lay further. A blanket of darkness loomed in the distance while his footsteps echoed within the confines of the pathway he was a slave to. Tariq Jamal was not a man of fright. In fact, before this night he had never contemplated the possibility of anything among the shadows. A tall man in his middle age, life had taught him to see things direct, simple, and an unmitigated explanation for it all. He never considered anything as extraordinary, nor did he expect on the possibility of it being otherwise. The world was set in separate halves, in daylight and moonlight. Yet, this pathway was blessed with neither. A skeptical man would brand this passage as unholy. Skeptics, or cowards as some might call them, hold little respect among the masses. Yet, on occasion, cowards might be the wisest of them all. Tariq thought none of this. He was, until that moment, still a man of simple thoughts. Blackness all there was ahead. As if walking blindly or with eyes wide shut. He relied on his footsteps, trusting the pathway to lead him towards the light, whenever it may arrive. The air felt like ice, so cold that even in the darkest of situations such as this, the unmistakable blow of smoke resonated from between his lips. Somehow visible, something a common man, perhaps a skeptic, would brand as atypical. Yet, Tariq was still a simple man. His eyes searched the open air, among the mist of his own breaths, for some sign of sanctuary. The simplicity that his world revolved around would characteristically, according to him, provide a refuge for the night. But nothing appeared, in the literal sense. Pitch black. The arrival of an alien sound reached his ears, the rattle of gravel crushing under the pressure of firmly laid feet. The passage had changed, no more was the perfectly carved road below him. This was the start of unpromising grounds. A coward would have been wise to turn back, but Tariq was a simple man. He stopped for the first time that night. The consistent, almost religiously followed route had struck him unsatisfied. He did not know where he was headed. There was nothing visible in front or behind. The logical thing to do was proceed ahead. He did not know then that logic was not the idea to be respected in that God-forsaken path. Wariness, caution, and suspicion should have been his friends. Unfortunately for Tariq, they had been locked deep inside for years now. Perhaps a rude awakening is what most men need. Soon enough, he had become accustomed to the melody, the cracking of pebbles underneath, the whisks of his breath, the still of the night, a piece of music to keep him company. But not for long. His melodious stroll in the darkness was interrupted. Another nomadic sound reached his ears. A screech, or maybe it was the ice cutting through air. Something disturbed the calm. Tariq, however, did not stop. He was until then a simple man. Simple men do not shy away from wonder. Curiosity belongs to them. They revel in it. It was this curiosity that carried toward him the shriek. The melody dissipated into the night. All that rang were the cries, and all that moved were Tariq's inquisitive feet. The mist emanating from him blocked his view of the dark path. He could not see ahead without breathing. This was not enough to sway his interest. Trapping as much air as he could, Tariq's faithful feet obliged to their master's demands. Here and there he looked for the presence of some creature, but the sound was something of its own. No simple creature could possess it. The closest being associated with it could only be one, a human. Tariq was accustomed to such sounds. He had children of his own. He remained unfazed, and with a sense of assistance accompanying him, something other men, perhaps cowards, would consider caution. The closer he seemingly reached to the sound, it became evident beyond consideration it was definitely a child's whine. The father, the simple man, Tariq, could only feel one thing for the moment, and it had nothing to do with fear or caution. He had to help the child. Finally, in the near distance he saw it, or rather him, as it became ostensible, a boy. For the second time that night, Tariq stopped in his tracks. In pitch darkness, a boy lay on the street. Even for a man such as him, this was out of the ordinary. Yet, the next instant, once the pitiable cries of the child wailed into the night again, the simple man, Tarek, felt his caution overcome with sentiment. He stepped closer to the boy. As if appropriately, or due to a magnificent coincidence, the darkness of the night was interrupted by the next half of the world. Moonlight. Yet, it bore only on the boy. Not on Tarek, not anywhere else. A coward would have considered this an indication of worry, but there was no coward on that passageway. As he approached the boy, the moonlight revealed the child's figure. A frail, weak-looking thing, cowering in fright, body shivering, perhaps from the cold or from the sheer terror most would feel in a place such as that. His hands tightly clasped around his knees, back turned towards Tarek. The figure rocked back and forth, a large outline of his spine visible. The boy wore nothing, save for tiny knickers, nowhere close to what anyone would wear on a night as cold as this one. It was no wonder he was shivering, he should have frozen by now. The boy gave no indication of having seen Tarek, his head firmly hidden between his arms. His cries had dissipated by this point, no more did the shrieks pierce through the night, instead the child barely eked out a whimper. The moonlight only served to highlight the poor boy's anguish, his weeping cracked by the iciness in the air, the trembling body unsettling the gravel on the ground. Tarek's heart melted with pity for the child. His need to help the child heightened as he stood beside him. "Who are you, my dear?" he asked. The boy gave no reply, his whimpering continued uninterruptedly. "What are you doing here?" Tarek asked. Again, the child did not bother with a response. "Where's your mother?" asked Tarek. This time an answer came back. The boy lifted a trembling hand and pointed straight ahead. Tarek followed his direction. Nothing but absolute darkness greeted him. He turned back toward the boy to find the same response. By now, the boy had ceased weeping once more, but his finger pointed relentlessly in the same direction. Tarek looked at the small figure in front of him. The boy must be in shock, he thought to himself. He did not seem able to walk by himself. Tarek did what no other person, coward or brave, would have done. He picked up the child in his arms. Fear was for the people who contemplated, after all, but Tarek was only a simple man, and men such as him considered all children the same way. Being a father himself, this was the way he could help. He would carry the boy to his mother. Tarek was once more on the pathway, not alone anymore, but still the same man he was when he first trod on this path. Now with a companion, a lost soul he chose to guide. Like before, the melody of the night resumed. Tarek had still not let the air out from between his lips. But the song remained the same, the gravel cracked, the still of the night, and the whisks of breath, this time from the boy. The moonlight had been left behind where the child was found. Tarek did not need it though, such was his confidence towards the pathway followed. His eyes searched the blackness like before, this time for any sign of a distraught woman seeking her lost child. No one came. Perhaps for the first time in his life, Tarek felt a burden on himself. The thought that he might have to take the boy home with him for the night was not the burden he was weary of, though. This burden was like the darkness itself, literal. With each step he took, the load increased, his arms trembled under the weight. It did not strike him immediately as to what it could be that was so heavy for him to carry. Only when his elbows began to buckle and his feet could move forward no more did Tarek realize the encumbrance weighing him down. The boy, who a moment ago felt like the lightest of feathers, now seemed like the heaviest of loads. But that couldn't be. He was a simple little thing, helplessly weeping for his mother. Then why couldn't Tarek's feet make another step? The darkness prevented him from investigating the source of this peculiarity, but suddenly the boy's outline could not be discerned anymore. Tarek could not see him. Again, suddenly, the moonlight made its appearance once more, not on the boy, but behind the two of them. Tarek's eyes followed the light. The beam traveled a considerable distance back, so much so that it became little more than a small bead of light. But something else could be seen, something the light revealed. A faint black outline. Tarek squinted his eyes to get a better view but could not figure it out. As if providing assistance to him, the beam of light expanded, revealing more of the black outline. It continued towards Tarek. Finally, the light captured the entire pathway, enabling him to see what the passage looked like. He couldn't believe what he saw. Legs outstretched, so much that the feet it belonged to were situated at the start of the light source. The remainder of the pathway was completely covered with the overextended limbs. The limbs stretched all the way towards Tarek, who for the first time in his life felt the sensation of suspicion. His feet were firmly attached to the ground below him. Then, these limbs had to belong to someone else. But it couldn't be the boy's. He was a feebly helpless thing crying for his mother. Or so he had been a moment ago. It dawned dreadfully on Tarek that the boy's weeping had silently disappeared. There were no sounds of grief anymore. There was no sound at all. Outstretched legs led to his arms. He slowly turned his eyes at the boy in his arms. He couldn't hold his breath in anymore. The mist impaired his vision of the boy's face as he let the air out from between his lips. As it cleared, Tarek, the as of yet simple man, the non-contemplative, who disregarded fear, caution, or weariness, felt all these sensations surge within him when he saw the child's face. What should have been a boy looking at him was something else entirely. Words failed to describe him. Terrible. Ghastly. Hideous. These would fall feeble to define the features of the absolutely terrifying being in Tarek's arms. The face of a demon, with huge green eyes on the grisly red face, large teeth protruding from its maws. What brought fear into Tarek's once apathetic personality were not just these features, it was the fact that the weeping had not only stopped, it had been replaced by a horrifying, low, growling cackle seeping from the orifice of the creature that stared straight into his eyes, as if fully intent on feeding upon his soul. For the smallest of seconds, Tarek looked back at it, having stopped for the third and final time that night. The moment when he learned truly the difference between the brave person, the skeptic, the coward, and the simple man. The brave person would have known better than to carry a strange being in his arms and would have gone ahead by himself looking for help. The coward would have known better than to have ventured into the path in the first place. The simple man, the man that was Tarek, was the one holding the demon, the atrocity, in his arms, frozen in fear. The creature bore its teeth wider, its cackle grew louder while its limbs remained outstretched for miles. In that moment, Tarek knew that there was no simplicity in the world, in children, or in the night. There was only one simple thing: fear. Dropping the boy from his hands, the middle-aged Tarek, the one simple man, ran as far and fast as his faithful feet could carry him, forgetting the song he had grown accustomed to, learning that it would never remain the same. When he finally reached the lit street he had originally set out to find, Tarek fell to his knees, acknowledging God's work and realizing that there was no such thing as a simple life. He frantically yelled out his gratitude to the heavens above, knowing it was heard. The next instant, the fear returned when he heard it. "Today, you escaped." The terrible voice rang across the passage, resonating from the path, the darkness left behind. As Tarek trembled back to his feet, he knew he had escaped and that he would never forget. The motel. Sylvia's work took her to towns by the edge of the country. However, an ill-fated incident during travel had caused her to develop a serious case of paranoia. On this night, the rain at her shook, the windows were glazed by the mist leaving the car's hood, and she could barely see through the darkness as the window was banged by the thunderous downpour from the skies. As if a prayer was answered from the heavens, a burst of light emerged from the fog. It was a motel. Neither magnificent nor welcoming, but a place to stay nonetheless. Sylvia contemplated braving further, but her mind flashed back to that night that man had seemed so friendly before he grabbed hold of her hair and tried to pull her into the shadows. Shuddering, Sylvia headed inside the motel. She came across a man at the reception, 2 men seated by the door, and a mother and a child by a piano. Sylvia's trepidation dissolved at the sight of the woman and her son. A hissing sound cut at her ears before she could let the relief settle in. It was the receptionist, whose eyes were round orbs containing a solitary pool of pitch black. His gaze burned at Sylvia. This expression looked all too familiar. Upon realizing he had been staring without reason, the man spoke. "Room for one?" "Yes." His lips spread across his face upon hearing her answer. The man looked into a folder he carried, but the smile remained. Sylvia saw as the 2 men seated averted their attention away from her, clearly watching her before she turned around. She felt the pangs of regret at failing to call on someone to accompany her before leaving. Expecting company? As if having opened a door to her thoughts, the receptionist's voice pricked her ears. "Excuse me?" Sylvia was scandalized at the question. "Need to add it in the register." The man pointed toward the book. Sylvia shook her head, pursing her lips. The man tilted his head, looking under the table. Sylvia had the horrible feeling he had a hidden camera under there. "Don't worry, we keep our customers nice and comfy here," the receptionist chortled, that sneer on his face looking more snake-like by the second. "Is my room ready?" Sylvia had no interest in making needless chit-chat. "We'll be in a minute," the man answered without pause, never moving his eyes off Sylvia, nor did the sneer dissipate in the slightest. The only thing missing from the yellow teeth that he flashed at her were the presence of fangs. An uncomfortable silence ensued. The man was more than happy to ogle at her, as if waiting to offer her a present. Sylvia had reached the end of her tether over his blatant staring before. "There you go," he smirked at Sylvia after a ding sound rang in the lobby. "Now you go in and have a nice shut-eye." She didn't give him a moment's regard and swiveled around to head over to the room, but was called out by the receptionist. "Lady, hey, lady." Sylvia creaked her neck toward him. "Don't forget your key." He stretched his hand from over the counter. Sylvia knew he wanted her to come to him. Not missing a beat, she stepped over and snatched the key from his hand, feeling the base of his icy palm on her fingers for a solitary second. Sneaking in a glimpse at him, she saw the man acknowledge the touch by closing his eyes, the softest of moans escaping his lungs. Sylvia stood in her position and was left frozen by the bizarreness of it. "Don't you worry," she heard a voice from behind her, a gravelly thin one. One of the men who had been staring at her spoke, tipping his hat. "Something funny seems to happen. You call us 2 boys to help you out, little lady," the second man concurred, throwing a raspy laugh that had no point to be let out. "What you looking at, squirt?" The man's voice cut low this time as he lasered into the boy with his mother. "You got something to add?" The boy, who looked no older than 11, retreated behind his mother. The woman put a weak face of defiance, which dissipated when facing 2 grown men who had no qualms in talking her down. Sylvia stood in between them. She bent down to the boy, smiling at him. "Would you like to be brave and look after your mom and me?" She held up her fingers in a V sign. "Friends?" The men howled in laughter when the boy held up his fingers to return Sylvia's gesture. She paid no heed, ushering the woman and child away toward the rooms. "Call on us when you need a man." The first man sank into his seat, spreading his legs wide open as if handing out an invitation. "I like me an assertive woman," chimed the receptionist, feeling confident enough now to speak his mind. He raised his eyebrows, along with a toothy grin, in Sylvia's direction. The boy and his mother had their room on an upper level, and Sylvia bid them goodbye as she entered her own room. The place was as dingy as the behavior of the men in the lobby. Rusting shelves, dust-filled carpets, a bed with stains all around it. Sylvia couldn't shake off the image of the man at the reception, his yellowing teeth and knowing grin emblazoned in her mind. She moved around the portraits hanging on the walls for any sign of a hidden camera, checking over and under the beds and cupboards to be absolutely certain. As the night wore on, sleep eluded her. It was then she heard the sounds of footsteps rustling outside. Every few minutes a door would open, followed by muffled voices and accompanying footsteps. It sounded to Sylvia the feet halted just outside her room. She pictured someone pressing their ear against the door, taking in her breaths as a form of arousal. A rap on the door struck her attention. Worried, Sylvia, she heard the voice. "Lady, open up," the receptionist called. "Got something for you." Upon opening the door, the man spilled into the room, having been leaning on it before Sylvia answered. He brought his hands up, and for a moment it seemed as if he was reaching for her throat. However, he held up a bar of soap, which he presented to Sylvia as if offering an olive branch. "Wouldn't want your stay here to get messy," he cackled as Sylvia took the soap from his hands. The man lingered without saying anything further, his eyes moving up and down as he took in the sight of Sylvia in her night robes. She slammed the door hard on his face. The sounds of his screeching laughter faded out once he'd walked far enough away. When she placed the soap in the shower, Sylvia saw a sticky substance on the palm of her hand. The man had been salivating on the soap. Feeling disgusted, Sylvia felt as if she couldn't scrub her hand enough and stripped her robes off to cleanse herself. She instantly regretted stepping in. The water was ice cold. Shivering slightly, Sylvia dabbed herself around with the soap, hoping to clean away the mental images of the eyes of those men staring at her. She let the water fall over her body, feeling its icy embrace envelop her. When she reached for the shampoo, she found it stuck on the tray before her. Sylvia tried hard to pull it toward her, but it wouldn't budge. Feeling frustrated, she turned the shower off to scrub her body with the soap, but fell dead silent. There was a sound in the bathroom. The sound of breathing. Sylvia trembled as she heard the distinct rattling of heavy breaths. In that moment she wondered, was there someone in there with her? Taking a deep breath, she creaked her neck upwards and sighed in relief. It was just an air vent. Her trepidation hadn't completely left her, though, as she recalled the receptionist's eyes looking at her in the doorway. Without realizing it, she'd managed to pull the shampoo out of the tray and saw the reflection of her eyes looking back at her in the small mirror on the wall. Sylvia noted how full of apprehension they were. The one-time incident back then had made her incapable of being at ease on her own. She dumped the shampoo over her head and let it ooze slightly into her eyes. She hoped some physical pain would let the mental ones fade away. As she washed her face, her eyes were burning from the shampoo, and she blinked furiously to make the pain dissipate. She peeked into the mirror to check the damage. When she fell back in the tub, the burning sensation now erupting in her chest. Although she had blinked, the reflection in the mirror hadn't. Those eyes weren't hers. And there was no mirror. The sounds of Sylvia's screeches tore through the walls of the bathroom as she saw the eyes stare back at her, unflinching. They were moving in all directions, taking in every morsel of skin on Sylvia's nude body. She thrust a towel on herself and careened out the door, scrambling down the halls of the motel, all the while crying as loudly as her throat would let her. The lobby was awakened by her cries, and Sylvia found herself in the company of the two men she'd left behind. She was prepared to kick and claw at them if necessary, but their startled expressions told her they meant no harm. The men consoled her enough to calm down her deliriousness before she saw the man emerge from behind the reception. The same sneer of lust etched in his features. The men didn't miss a beat and rained their fists into the man, almost as hard as the rain that was banging against the windows of the motel. "I ain't done nothing," the man croaked, blood trickling down his mouth as the painful mauling the men had delivered onto him was showing. "You're a crazy whore." He never got to finish his words. The men kicked him within an inch of his life. The man was left trembling in a mangled state and only his blood to accompany him. The police arrived within the hour, and a grateful Sylvia thanked her rescuers as the men left with the authorities to send the perverted receptionist away. Sylvia retreated back to her room. The thought of that man leering on her naked body revolted her, but she took solace in him being apprehended. Sylvia wondered if she had been wrong to judge men without understanding how they really were. Those two strangers had fought for her honor. Lost in her thoughts, Sylvia found herself in the bathroom again when she heard the sounds of air as before. She looked at the vent, only to realize it had never been on in the first place. It was the sound of someone breathing. On instinct, her head turned toward the shower wall where the trick mirror had been. This time, she didn't see eyes. This time, she saw fingers. They protruded out of the little small gap, extending toward her. Sylvia fell back into the tub, too horrified at the person who it was. She didn't need to see his face. The fingers held up a V, a sign of peace. The hand was small, just enough for it to belong to a child. Sylvia scrambled over toward the room door, but found it locked from the outside. From inside the bathroom, she heard the sounds of breathing magnify as thuds from the vent started bursting through. The boy fell into the bathroom. He didn't say a word, he simply tiptoed toward the door, holding up his fingers in the same offer of friendship. Sylvia saw as he reached into his pocket and extracted a small knife. The boy took the blade and placed it between his fingers. Before thrusting it in and out between them, the blood tore through his skin and onto his palm, which the boy licked by the tip of his tongue. In that moment, Sylvia realized she had been right. The world of men was not to be trusted. Sylvia managed to lock the bathroom door before the boy could assault her. She called the police, who took her away for questioning. The receptionist had been a formerly convicted sex offender who had gotten off on a technicality. He had created small tunnels inside the motel to peep onto women who checked in. On that night, the man had intended to do the same to Sylvia, but had been caught before he could. The boy had discovered the tunnels and found Sylvia's room. The police never believed Sylvia's story. The boy and his mother got the benefit of the doubt. The next day, Sylvia had watched as the boy left the police station, holding up the peace sign toward her as he and his mother drove away. Sylvia never travels alone anymore,